I know this seems like I'll say that again for the recording. What I'm here to talk to you today about is medRxiv. And it may seem a little orthogonal. I mean, I'm not giving a deep cardiology talk. There's lots of things we can talk about. You guys are doing great work. The evolution of research, cardiovascular research and its application in medicine, the degree to which research and clinical care are coming together in real time using real world data. And you guys have been leaders at leveraging the kind of data that can be produced in clinical practice as well as within clinical trials. But today my mind is thinking that there's something going on that I would like to make sure that you know about and sort of understand the perspective of, and to give you a sense of. And are you seeing the big screen, Dennis? Does that work? Yeah. So it's medRxiv, and I'm talking about changing norms of medical communication. And let me just get started. I'll just say, as disclosures, I have no relevant financial disclosures for this talk. I'm a co-founder of medRxiv, which is a nonprofit and a volunteer. I'm a member of the medRxiv oversight team. My institution receives no revenue from medRxiv. Like I said, I don't receive any revenue from medRxiv. In the recent years, last year or two, we've gotten some support from Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to help support the initiative. Part of my latent objective here is to get you to think about, if you're a scientist, about posting preprints. I want to see it spread within the cardiovascular community, in particular, my own home research community, that people will think about citing preprints if they're writing articles. Think about incorporating this. How does this become part of the research ecosystem? Reviewing preprints. We actually always need affiliates, people who are willing to do screening of preprints, and you're probably, whether you know it or not, seeing information from preprints. So let me level set here a little bit. What is a preprint? A preprint is a research manuscript that's yet to be certified by peer review and accepted for publication in a journal. A preprint server is an online platform dedicated to the distribution of preprints. So preprints are sort of you know, I'd say the director's cut. You know, it's what you've finished a study, you've written it up, and it's not yet gone through the peer review process, but you want to share it. So this is a cartoon from ASAP Bio, a group that was advocating around for preprints, a group that I was part of, where we're just sort of saying a scientist has a manuscript and submits to a journal, goes to an editor, the editor sends it out for peer reviewers. But you see these other arrows kind of go back. The editor can send it back to the scientist, peer reviewers can send it back. The others then sends it back to the scientist. I mean, the point is, all this is going on and time is elapsing. And at the margin, you know, I'm not here to suggest that peer review doesn't have a role in science. It certainly does. But the distance between finishing a piece of work and being able to share it can be quite long. Preprints, the scientist finishes work, can write it up as a manuscript, send it to the preprint server, and within days, it's now available to share with the world. But it's not such a radical idea. Our scientific meetings are, in a sense, a form of preprint distribution. We submit abstracts. Abstracts are like a paragraph. That's not really representing any sort of deep peer review. They get screened. Somebody finds them interesting. Maybe they find the title interesting. Maybe the conclusion looks interesting to them. Anyway, it goes into the meetings, and the meetings are basically pre-peer reviewed content, but they're only occurring episodically, and the products are ephemeral. So you have an AHA meeting, somebody has a poster, somebody has slide presentations. There's no place for you to find those artifacts of the meeting. Maybe a newspaper article gets written, a blog, some sort of communication comes out. The AHA has press conferences associated with their meeting, except for the very few presentations that are associated with a concomitant publication, with a simultaneous publication. You know, the content sort of disappears into the ether. You can contact the authors, but you know, they're not citable. You can't find them. They may evolve. You don't know whether what was really presented at the meeting. And so, you know, it's not that we haven't had a means to disseminate pre-peer review content. That does happen, but not in any systematic way, and not in a way that could be archived. So this is a way to kind of professionalize it in a way. So it turns out, you know, when we talk about preprint server within clinical medicine, that it's it's not the first. It's building on a history over the last maybe 30 years of the development of these preprint servers based on, I mean, really the advance was technology. The original preprints were a guy by the name of Ginsberg, Paul Ginsberg at Cornell, who was a physicist. And what they were in the habit of doing was taking their articles when they finished them and tacking them to their office door and encouraging their colleagues to, as they walk by, to take a look at the paper, make comments, and help them improve it. And so that was sort of a very manual process, very sort of analog process. And then as technology advanced, Paul and his colleagues sort of had the idea to be able to put this online. You know, that sort of was pre-internet. They used the Los Alamos server to begin with, but it was a place where other physicists could come and gather electronically, virtually, and be able to see things and comment and elevate each other's work. It eventually became archived, and the idea is it was outside of a firewall, and that people could. Let's see. I'm looking in the camera here. There we go. So people could, post these things, and around the world people could do it. Then in other fields, they also grew up. Archive became more the preprint server for the physical sciences, starting with physics, but expanding out astronomy and mathematics, a lot of data science on there. And then a lot of others grew up around this. If you look in the economics literature, for example, almost every paper that you see is really a preprint because it takes maybe 2-3 years for papers to get published, wind their way through the economics peer review process. It becomes a publication of record at the end. It still matters. People care about this, but it enables junior people to show account for their work, to give job talks, to be able to get other people talking about what they do. And so this became sort of a common thing at this. So I just to give you a little bit of context and history on this. So I had the privilege of being the editor for Circulation Quality and Outcomes. And when I finished, although I was very proud of the work that we had done, I sort of had a sense that journals were going to need to evolve, or medical communication was going to need to evolve. And I wrote this piece at the end of journals. I don't think I was seriously feeling that journals were truly going to end, at least not immediately. But I did want to create some people thinking about medical communication. And again, part of this is in the spirit of saying we've got those of us who do research and those of us who consume research have a responsibility to think about the ecosystem in which this information is being communicated. So we may have a central area that we're focusing in, whether it's clinical research or some combination. But this is this is where we live. I mean, we live where, on how information gets generated, consumed, communicated. It becomes important for improving clinical care, but also in fostering collaborations and in speeding the progress of new breakthroughs within medicine. So we have to be thinking about this, not just accepting what's here, but thinking about whether it's serving a purpose. And I said for hundreds of years, medical journals have served as arbiters of quality of medical research, but the traditional peer review publication models frame the hierarchical gateway to publication historically in the hands of experts is at odds with the ubiquitous democratization of data and information in the 21st century. That there were things that were changing, and I started listing off. This is just the first page. What was like I think a 4-page opinion piece where I was saying, but the journals are too slow, too expensive, too limited in scope. And I went on to describe a lot. I said they're too powerful. They're not transparent. They're too dependent on metrics that like impact factor that don't really necessarily serve society. Their business model, I believe, is somewhat flawed, especially when you've got billion-dollar corporations that are sucking value out of the infrastructure in order to even though we're producing the content. And my conclusion was we've arrived at a juncture where medicine and science need new vehicles for the dissemination of knowledge. These new approaches will enable us to separate the wheat from the chaff in order to better serve the public. The question for all of us in medical publishing, again, I'm sort of leaving medical publishing as I'm writing this, and for those who consume medical knowledge, is how would this best be accomplished in a new world that's flat, digital, and transparent? So I'm starting to think about, what's going on within our world and how we're communicating information. And I'm also repetitively having this experience as a research scientist of the delay. So you finish a paper you submit it, and it's going to take anywhere from months to years for it to see light. And, I say this as someone who's published fairly extensively, and I think I have a pretty good sense of the quality of the work that's being submitted. And I can tell you that the weighting may or may not have any relationship to the quality of what you've got. If you've got a late-breaking clinical trial, yes, sure, those are going to end up being simultaneous publications. You got large, massive trial, but for the vast majority of work that's step at a time, bringing about progress and fostering the kind of collaboration, you can wait a long time. I had a paper at HSR that we got to revise and resubmit after 4 months. We resubmit after, it takes us another 2 months to do all of what they asked, which I will say at the margin, I didn't think fundamentally changed the message of the paper, but fine, it was a lot of work. And then a year and 3 months later, they hadn't rendered a decision. And, like, this is me, like, every month going like, what's going on? They're going like, yeah, we're working on it, with no real transparency about what happened. We ultimately pulled the paper, sent to JAMA Network Open, gets published 3 months later, but like, that's like a 2.5 year, by the time we're done, it's almost like 2 years. And if you have any sense that the science you're doing has applicability to patient care or policy, and you think, if you have any sense that the reason you're in this is to help make the world better, then 2 years is unacceptable to begin to foster conversations about the work. Now, again, the publication of record is a vetted publication that goes through the entire process, but I'm impatient to be able to let my colleagues and others see what we're doing and be able to comment on it. We've been doing some studies. I'll kind of flip through these pretty quickly, but it was also bothering me that there's a tremendous amount of publication bias in our field. This is one of a series of studies we did looking at publication reporting of clinical trial results, actual experiments on human beings. People participate with the sense that you as a scientist are going to help share the advance medical knowledge and share those results, that you're participating in order to make the world better largely, and sometimes at some risk to yourself. So we started looking at this, and we started finding this is a emblematic figure that I think is not that much different. This is now about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, but it's showing you the curve of time to study completion and publication, and time from study completion on the y-axis, and the percent of the studies that are published. And you can see, even at 2 years, only about 30% of the clinical trials are published, and that this flattens out at about 5 years at only about 60%. So 40% of the experiments that are registered on clinicaltrials.gov, and then the authors have taken the time, the investigators have taken the time to say that it's actually completed, actually get published by 5 years, and sort of flattens out. That means any meta-analysis, any systematic review is missing a big chunk of data that it never sees the light of day. And by the way, these are not published, nor are they the results posted on clinicaltrials.gov. And by the way, we repeated this this is all comers. We repeated this for NIH funded trials. It looked exactly the same. NIH went bonkers. They thought we had, this couldn't be right. Mike Lauer repeats the study. We published in BMJ. Lauer repeats it because from the NIH. It goes to the New England Journal. Same result. Just virtually replicates what we've got. And so this is also bothering me, that there's not an easy way for people to post results. We've got this issue around, missing data essentially. And so, also other work we're doing is, as Dennis noted, we're working in open science, open access, open communication. As it's sort of a sidelight for our group is to say, what are we doing to try to improve the research infrastructure writ large? Not be helpless researchers who are at the mercy of the way in which the system is set up, but how can we actively work to improve it, change it, evolve it? Around this time, like as I'm working on this stuff, I'm becoming aware of this preprint server culture. I'd been invited to give a talk at Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and around open data and the work that we'd been doing on the YODA project. And there were also a large number of talks around preprints. And there was this group that had been formed in life sciences, ASAP Bio, by Ron Vale and Jessica Polka on the side. And they had Paul Ginsberg, I had mentioned to him before, who founded arXiv. He's at the top next to Ron and more toward the middle. And he gave a talk, and so I'm going like, this is kind of interesting. It's interesting because these artifacts become available, they can be discussed, and they also don't go away. The idea of the archive is it's always going to be able to exist. Plus, when things get published in peer review, you have the opportunity to be able to compare what did the initial one look like and how did it evolve. Many of us have had the experience where the editors get very heavy-handed. I mean, they almost rewrite our discussions. I mean, it's almost like it becomes their paper. I mean, just to be honest. And so, I often have an urge to say, like, here's what I actually think, and you can sort of see that evolution through that. I also met this guy, Brian Nosek, who's a psychologist at UVA. Brian's next to Jessica here at the bottom. He's an expert in reproducibility in science, has a Center for Open Science, and he was developing an incubator for preprint servers. So if people wanted to develop a preprint server, you could come and work with Brian. He was getting some funding for that, and I was really inspired by the work he was doing, and started thinking a lot about it. And what they were sort of promoting, ASAP Bio and others, was that if you put a preprint server together, it sort of gives you a priority claim. You've got an idea, you're putting it out there, you're anchoring it. Otherwise, when people learn about your idea, it could be based on how long it takes the journals to get you through peer review. It's not that we're in a competition, we should be in cooperation, but still, you may have a really good idea and have shown a really interesting result, and you sort of want to be the first to put the stake in the sand to say, like, this is what I'm talking about. You don't want to be delayed and essentially get scooped because it's just a matter of how fast the journals go. It turns out that in life sciences, there's some evidence that the preprint servers were increasing attention, increasing citations, giving people feedback, and proof of productivity. For especially a junior person, either going up for first job or going up for early promotion, by having preprints, somebody can actually see the products of what they're working on and have finished up until yesterday. Otherwise, you're putting sort of submitted and things are in sort of inaccessible venues. So let me just stop right there. I don't know, Dennis, I was saying, in these sort of grand rounds, it's sort of weird. You just end up talking into a camera for an hour. So I told Dennis I just wanted to take some quick junctures in the middle here just to make sure that I'm level setting correctly, and that if anyone's got any questions at this point.
Eric has been just doing a couple of questions in the chat. Eric, do you want to just maybe mention a question to Harlan?
Sure. I'm fascinated by this topic, so I'm really enjoying what you have to say. But two little points. One is just around the sort of alternate purpose that some of medical publishing serves in terms of a marker of career success, which is, perhaps sometimes at odds with the nature of the publication or the imperative to get the information out there and to get quality information out there. And the other point I just raised in the comment was, I agree totally. There's this valuable dialogue, interactive dialogue between reviewers, potentially between reviewers, authors, editors, and then even with the readers who attempt to then correspond with authors. And it seems so restricted, at least at the journal level. Some of that now goes way outside the journal and takes place in social media, that sort of dialogue. But the sort of structured dialogue with the authors, you're limited to 200 words or 300 words in a letter, and the letters to the editor appear only once, and the authors reply once, and then the correspondents can't reply again to the authors. And yet, I think there's sometimes really valuable discussions that start to emerge, and they're just so truncated.
Yeah, I agree on both points. I think the issue about it is true that the peer review publication plays a role, and I'm not suggesting that we replace it yet. I'm not being that radical yet, but I do think a publication of record has value in the literature. I can tell you though, I wonder about the reproducibility of the editorial process. And again, there are sort of extreme, you do a major, clinical trial, 30,000 people, well done experiment, pretty much that's going to go in a top journal. But for a vast majority of others, especially around observational research, the journal's ability to discriminate quality and I think their reproducibility in determining what they're going to take, is not high. And I think we've all had this experience. I mean, we have papers of similar quality, and then, for one day the New England Journal writes you back and says, hey, they like it. You think you've won the lottery. You have similarly high quality pieces, and they don't even get reviewed, or they may get reviewed and rejected. There's a whole range of reasons why they end up getting interested. And then some of my best work, you can see, like, if it doesn't get in the top journals, it can fall to a middle journal pretty rapidly. And you're sitting there thinking, I think that this is an unappreciated gem. I've also had the experience of saying, I'll just throw this to the New England Journal or somewhere, just to see if they're interested. I don't think it's as high an impact as some of my other work. And then they'll say yes. And it's hard to know. So what kind of arbiter is it? I think it's more like, if you pelt them with enough stuff, you'll get stuff through if it's high quality, but it's probabilistic more than stochastic, more than it is, I think, one of that they can truly discern this out. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard. They're getting a lot of things, just like any college, competitive college, in the US, I don't know, in Canada, but there's a lot of good candidates who would be good students. And, I don't know how reproducible that process is, but it ends up making a big difference in people's lives. I think the thing about the conversations, I felt for a long time, I wish we could publish the back and forth that goes on with reviewers and journals, because there's a lot of rich information in the responses. We spend a lot of time crafting responses to those comments, and then they disappear. Like, nobody ever gets to benefit from seeing the back and forth with the editors, let alone what you're talking about, which is back and forth with readers. Part of the preprint server idea is bringing all this stuff forward and creating sort of threads of discussion that people can then either on Twitter or on the medRxiv site itself, so people can follow it. So let me just go on here. So some of the experience, I'm just giving you some of the background that sort of led to medRxiv. So some of the experiences I'm having, like I'm saying, I'm in with life sciences folks. I'm being frustrated as an author. I'm starting to wonder whether or not the current system is really serving the best needs. The Sprint trial was one thing that happened that kind of caught my attention. So Sprint, remarkable trial, really well done, and compared intensive blood pressure management to standard treatment, and sort of has contributed to change in the HA guidelines. And in September, what do? They stop the trial early. It's a positive result, and they have a press conference. But there's no artifact from the press conference. I mean, they just have a press conference and say, this is positive. It's amazing. It's going to change things. Gary Gibbons ends up saying this study provides potentially life-saving information, but they don't really tell you the information. It's in September. They stop it early. You can look at the trial design and infer what they probably found. But, it doesn't turn out till then in November that they ended presenting this at HA and having a simultaneous publication. And Sprint showed among adults with hypertension, target of 120 or less, better than target of 140. And a terrific trial, but there's like and on the NIH side, they're saying, but we published it rapidly. But there was a gap. If it was good enough for a press release, then it should have been good enough to actually provide some artifacts of what exactly they found. And if you went to clinicaltrials.gov page, actually, they didn't post results until December. So it wasn't like they did that and they posted the results on the trial registration page. They don't post them anywhere, except they have a press conference, which leads to New York Times articles and so forth. But so Topol and I wrote a piece about this, which is don't delay the news of medical breakthroughs. We said the problem is that many details of studies have not been released. We wrote this on September 17th. So, but it was published about a week after they have the press conference. It said be months before the study is presented at a major scientific meeting, and possibly even longer before it's published. And what we tried to say was, kudos to the scientists who conducted such a large, complex, important study, which will likely have life-saving consequences for a condition that can be treated easily in most patients. But now the medical community needs to adopt a new approach in situations like this one to disseminate life-saving results in a timely, comprehensive, and transparent way. Lives depend on it. The point was, if you were going to go public with the result, then you ought to show what was that based on. And even though it hadn't gone through peer review, you were already going pre-peer review by having the press conference. So at least you ought to have a citable piece that shows what it is. Now, like I said, I've been exposed to the idea of bioRxiv, and around this time, I'm starting to talk to the bioRxiv founders about starting to allow clinical research to show up on their server. They'd sort of been exclusively life sciences in the beginning. And an example of this was that, as a result of that sprint trial, then there were new guidelines that were released in 2017. And at the AHA, now I'd gotten kind of wind that there was going to be a change. We knew the guidelines were coming out, and they were likely to be changed. Just to remind you, it sort of changed, elevated to 120 over 129, sort of pushed things back. And so, I'd been working with a young investigator at that time, was a fellow, now he's faculty member at Yale, Rohan Kara. And we sort of started talking about this question, well, how is this going to actually affect the number of people labeled with hypertension? And we thought, wouldn't it be good to have something come out at the time the guidelines come out that would put this in perspective? So we start working on a paper in anticipation of the fact that maybe the guidelines would do this. It was a bet, that, and even if we felt, even if the guidelines didn't do this, it's still of some value to say, if they do adopt the sprint approach in the future, what impact would that have on number of people labeled with hypertension, and what would be the issues around that? So we started working on this. And then when the guidelines did come out and said what they did, we immediately sort of revised our preprint and posted it. We posted on bioRxiv, the impact of 2017 AHA guidelines on the prevalence of hypertension and eligibility for antihypertensive therapy in the United States. And this comes out just about, we're able to post it. And then, like I said, it's within days, a day, I think, this comes up. So it's coming up simultaneously with the guideline. We're able to be contemporaneous with this information coming out to provide this insight. Again, pre-peer review, but we're able to share information that we're doing. People can consider us credible or not. But it sort of fosters conversations about what happens. We looked at the US and China, how many more millions of people would be labeled with hypertension, what implication might that be? How ready does the medical community need to be to care for all these people who are now being considered to have hypertension? And so, if like you see, so I think you see this comes out on the 13th. I think it was on the 11th or something that the guidelines came out. And look, this is you guys may be familiar with altmetric scores. The altmetric score is 459. It gets picked up by 45 news outlets, blogged by 2. People discuss it. Some people critique it, but directionally, people feel it's correct. We actually didn't get any criticism on the methods, and but a lot of discussion that went up. And by the way, 15 was cited 15 times. But then, importantly, we then continued to we took all the comments, and we took what we heard, and we continued to improve it. We submitted to BMJ. BMJ sends it back with reviews. We send it back to BMJ. It gets thing. But look, the way it works is on the preprint server, when it gets published, there's a link. So if you're looking at the original preprint, you can see what we put in, and you can also see, you can link to the BMJ article, which ends up coming out almost a year later. It comes out in July of the next year. So we're posting the preprint in November, which engenders a lot of discussion because the guidelines come out. People can sort of look at this, and then by the time, we're very proud of a publication of record in the BMJ also. And if you compare the conclusions side by side, I won't go read them, but I'm just saying they're basically the same. That would they be? We said in the preprint, we associate with a substantial increase in prevalence of hypertension. We said in BMJ will markedly increase the number of people labeled as having hypertension. The numbers actually didn't change much at all. Actually, I don't think they did change at all. So around this time, like I said, this was November 2017, where we're using the preprint server. It was 2015 where Sprint comes out, talking about Topol. I think it was probably a little earlier. I'm at this Howard Hughes meeting. So I'm invited to give a talk at the 8th International Congress on Peer Review and Scientific Publication. They asked me to do a keynote, and they didn't specify what I could talk about. They said, talk about anything you want. So I went to my team and I said, I think it's time. We need to be part of helping to create a preprint server within clinical medicine and build it and see if they'll come. And so we said, I'm going to use this keynote to announce it. But we had no idea actually how we were going to do it. But we just thought, we're going to say we're going to do it and then see what happens. So I'm up at this keynote, and I end up, you could see the medRxiv is spelled differently here because we're we evolved, we dropped the A to be more in line with arXiv and the others. But basically stood there and I said to 1,000 people from the publishing industry, we're going to disrupt your field, and we're going to put a clinical preprint server up. And we got a lot of good comments. A lot of people were concerned about the potential harms and misinformation and legitimate things to say. So we listened intently. And at the end of the meeting, I was approached by the folks from bioRxiv, Cold Spring Harbor. They said, hey, we've been thinking about spinning off something too. And BMJ came up to me and said, we'd be supportive. We're not looking for something that's of BMJ, but an independent preprint server we think we could help with. And so we started working together. And at that point, it took us almost another year and a half to really put this together in a way that we thought could be safe, responsible, and promote the best interest of the profession. But that's where that stood. So let me just pause there for a second. Dennis, are there any other questions or?
Yeah, so maybe I'll ask Graham to ask. He posted a couple of questions. Graham Wright, who is our Schulich research director for the past decade or so. Graham, do you want to just raise your
Yeah, kind of. I guess my comments are evolving as your talk is evolving. I guess my point being that is really that we've seen in COVID the strengths and challenges of this whole area of preprints, and I think there's the speed side, and which has helped the science evolve, I think. But there's also the challenge that these things are public, and the public starts to treat this stuff as validated science and wanting to use it. And we've seen that in some of the treatments that came out that needed to get revised. So I guess another comment that you've already sort of addressed is the need that these preprints evolve and make sure that they have pointers to what happens to them, so that people in the down the line don't go and cite the preprints as the final story.
Yep, and I think that's the tension. And let me just get this, what I'm going to go now to, which is how do you do this in a way how do you optimize it for the clinical research community and the public, recognizing that, you can make a mistake in talking about astrophysics and somebody else will try to correct it, but it's unlikely to have a major impact, although maybe climate science or something, is something more applied. But there's a lot of theoretical work on the other kinds of preprints. But and my work in data science, our work has become more digital and we're focusing a lot more on advanced analytics. We depend a lot on preprints to tell us what other people are thinking, where they're going. If I just depended on peer-reviewed publications in that field, I'd be behind everyone. So it's almost like I need, as a competitive advantage, to know what other people are saying and working on and thinking whether they're right or not. Actually, often I don't even care because I just want to sort of see what directions people are taking, what might be the next generation of breakthroughs in the field. But for us, we have to be very thoughtful about the potential for this to engender misinformation or lead to behaviors that might be counter to the best interest of patients and society. So that's when we end up launching this. We spend a lot of time thinking, what are the guardrails that would make this safe? And just to, again, provide the context here. So it's, I don't know why that flips like that. That the medRxiv is a community-based, not-for-profit, free for everyone, no firewall, author-centric services, not products or publications. It's independent of any journal. All papers are screened by experts. I'm going to get back to this in a second. We go for rapid posting within a day or two, and you can continue to iterate your posting. So you can put version 1, version 2, version 3. You get results. You've improved what you've got until you publish it. You can continue to iterate on the preprint. And we have content APIs and feeds and social media accounts and text and data mining resources. This screening is, I'm going to get to this in a minute, is a very important feature of optimizing it. And so what we wanted to do is how are we going to mitigate these concerns and risks? And the reason I put concerns and risks is some of the concerns I felt were like overwrought, but there clearly are risks. I mean, we need to embrace that fact and then deal with it. So what we said was that, all the preprints had submission requirements for authors. People needed to be able to identify themselves and so forth, clear posting criteria, research articles only. This screening process was going to focus on asking a few questions. Most importantly, if this is wrong, would it be likely to cause harm? And we often, I would say 15% of the submissions to medRxiv, we look at it and we say, this is better after peer review. That's not making a judgment that it's wrong. It's not making a judgment that it's not good. it's making a judgment that this is of sufficient potential harm if it's wrong, that we think it's better after peer review. And so, you know, there's still, and I would almost like to shrink that. I think we're being still overly cautious, but it's there. And we want to signal the need for caution within our website. So we have a lot of stuff on the website around preprints or preliminary reports of work that have not been peer reviewed. They should not be relied on to guide clinical practice, health-related behaviors. I'd say that, you know, there are people that are capable of doing their own peer review. Or when it comes to Project Recovery, Martin Landry and Peter Horby, you know, you can also, from the source, you can be pretty confident that it's going to be a pretty good preprint. But in general, we're just saying for the public, they shouldn't be relying on this. We say the article is a preprint, has not been peer reviewed. It reports new medical research that's yet to be evaluated and so should not be used to guide clinical practice. We're trying to be very clear about that. And we give guidance to journalists and other individuals who report on medical research that when they're discussing and reporting it, they should do so in a way that acknowledges that this hasn't been through peer review. Now, we all know that just going through peer review isn't magic either. And, you know, you can get something published somewhere, you know, almost, you know, at will. But still, we're trying, this is less than that. And our submission requirements are such that we want people to follow ICMGE guidance, including author names, contact information, affiliations. Nobody can be anonymous. Funding and conflict and competing interest statements are required. Statements of an IRB, it has to have ethics approval. You can't be identified. There can be pictures of patients or any identifiers of patients. You need study registration where applicable, study protocols, and a data sharing availability statement. And you should be using checklists. So again, we're trying to optimize. In physics, they don't care. You can post anything. In clinical research, we're saying, you know, there needs to be some discipline here around what's there and what is archived. And so what's happened as a result is, you know, you can look at this early phase, which in June 2019 we launched, and the growth in the early days in this figure, of course, looks slow. This is cumulative manuscripts. We were growing faster than bioRxiv had at a comparable phase. The bioRxiv is wildly successful. Almost every life sciences researcher will post on bioRxiv or an equivalent when they're producing their studies. And we were pretty happy with this growth. But then we get to just after the first of the year 2020, pandemic starts, and people discover that medRxiv is a pretty good place to be able to post information for discussion around the pandemic. And so we grow in ways that we didn't imagine in the beginning, and put some stress on the system, but also it really was quite gratifying, the role that it could play. And you could see that CV here for us means cardiovascular, of course, but in this context means COVID. And you can see the difference, you know, as we got into the spring. I mean, the vast majority of the papers that were posted monthly were COVID papers, but we're still getting a substantial proportion of non-COVID papers, but I think not enough. If you look at the subject categories, infectious disease and epidemiology naturally are sort of dominating, but we're starting to see, you know, papers, preprints from a vast array of fields within medicine, not quite fast enough in cardiology, still disappointed. You know, the pandemic doesn't have a monopoly on suffering. I mean, or isn't the only imperative for progress. And again, if we're doing medical research that we think is actionable, that other people can build on, that is going to help get us smarter, faster, then I believe we should be sharing it more avidly and earlier in the process to be able to make that kind of progress. Just for your context, withdrawn manuscripts, we don't actually call them retracted because they were never published as manuscripts. They were posted as preprints, just a terminology issue. But only 0.2% were withdrawn. These are the papers where something's really been shown to be fraud or or they withdrew maybe they published it in peer review subsequently and withdrew it because there were questions raised about it, ends up being withdrawn, but it ends up being a pretty small number. In July, we had 6 million abstract views, 700,000 full text views, 1.7 million PDF downloads. I mean, it's getting a lot of attention. And since the beginning, we've had over 12,000 institutions, so author affiliations with more than 12,000 institutions, 145 countries. The top countries are USA, UK, India, and Germany. So pretty cool. I mean, that we're able to put this up and get this. Let me just go through the rest because I know we're getting close. I want to just open to questions at the very end. So I want to say that, people use preprint servers for a variety of purposes. And pre-publication is only one of them. Another might be that I've gotten a chunk of research done and I want to just share it. I know that's not going to go to, I'm not even going to submit that to journal yet, but I want to chunk it so that people can start seeing how the work is progressing. Or I post something's preprint server, I get a lot of criticism. And I realize that this is really not ready for peer review submission even. And I really need to go back to the drawing board and sort of fix it up. Anyway, there's a wide variety of reasons, but this is just to show you though, sometimes how it works is dexamethasone in hospitalized patients with COVID-19, I think arguably one of the most important papers to come out. It came out of the Recovery Collaborative. Like I said, Peter Horby and Martin Landry have done, extraordinary work with their clinical trials network in the UK. And here they're showing dexamethasone reduces mortality. They posted it as a preprint. And again, what was the counterfactual? What would have happened without the preprint server? They had a press conference. They stopped the trial. They had a press conference. But at that point, they submitted to the New England Journal. And they wanted to create an artifact of what it is they had up to that point. And they wanted to share with people, what did we just submit to the New England Journal? And so they posted it on medRxiv and got a lot of attention, a lot of sites, engendered a lot of discussion. And then, it ends up getting published in the New England Journal of Medicine. If you look at the results, by the way, except for the New England Journal of Medicine changes the scale on the y-axis, it's pretty much the identical result between those two. And you're really talking about Monday, June 22nd, 2020, and Friday, July 17th. But this is in the middle of a very, important period of the pandemic. And what I think happened was it enabled the community to really vet this paper and talk about it. And on Twitter, Landry's responding, Horby's responding. They're putting comments on medRxiv. And then New England Journal of Medicine comes out with a publication of record. The medical community is ready to put this into action. And to me, it was a really good example how the preprint server could work. Recovery Group has posted, they have press conferences every time they finish, and then they post what they've just submitted to the journal for people to discuss. I want to just take a minute or two to talk about, what are some of the edgier points here. And so this is a preprint that was just posted on September 8th by Hogue, and it was about SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccination associated myocarditis. So at least there's some cardiology in this grand round. So here it is. So what they did was they took the VAERS database, the database of the CDC, which is felt to be not particularly strong at capturing side effects, but and analyzed it. And this thing look at the altmetric score on this, almost 10,000. And this is a hot topic, whether or not the risk of benefits and risks for young people who are getting the vaccine. And we've seen in young boys in particular that there is an increase, it seems, in myocarditis, often not progressing to severe myocarditis, but it has caused some symptoms. So this is a big issue. And they say that we thought at medRxiv that this was, we didn't judge the science, but we thought that their conclusion was circumspect. Further research into the severity of long-term sequelae post-vaccination cardiac adverse events is warranted, and quantification of the benefits of the second vaccination dose and vaccination in addition to natural immunity may be indicated. But they're raising the question of whether the balance is against individual net benefit in the group of particularly young boys. And anyway, they go, and this is where they make the case, that maybe there are more hospitalizations after vaccine for myocarditis than there were from COVID. Other people have disputed this, but in our country, it brings out like lots of stuff. You may have, depending on how closely you follow politics in the U.S., this Marjorie Taylor Greene is an American politician, businesswoman, and a far-right conspiracy theorist. She's a QAnon adherent. She's saying all kinds of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with science, and she tweets this piece, and that in part starts to get a lot of things. Telegraph tweets it in not a way that conforms with our recommendations, where they don't acknowledge this is coming from a preprint, and says teenage boys are 6 times more likely to suffer from heart problems from vaccination than to be hospitalized from COVID, a major study found. This is totally off the rails. Now, so what happens is, so the Twitter sphere lights up, and lights up in part about preprints, and that's why I want to focus on this. So Bob Zealand, who I don't know, every time I do something, there's always a guy out there who's like writing tweets that are criticizing anything you're doing. I mean, when I go to the grocery store, and he'll write a tweet criticizing that, but he's at least reliable doing that. And so he says, there's a breakdown because medRxiv graced both Guardian News and Telegraph's false headlines. It's sort of, the media does something wrong, and it's about the preprint. But we need to listen to what the community has to say, and another person's up there. Good thread on myocarditis preprint. I've been very critical of preprints that are too quickly disseminated in the media, and this one's no exception. On the other hand, I think the vitriol directed at the authors is wrong. And so, there are people being concerned that this is promulgating information. The problem is on the preprint server, I don't want to say that the only preprints that can go up are those that conform to my scientific bias, the things that I believe are true. So that we can't have at odds findings, so you've got to be able to allow, and I think this is a topic that's worthy of discussion about what that net benefit is. But, people feel like in a charged political atmosphere, anything you do like this may be contributing to anti-vaxxing or something. I tweeted, do you get the discussion about preprints is exactly the purpose of preprints. So that when someone claims something, you can look at the source and experts can comment. And there was a lot of commentary on the methods of this study, and almost all of them were sort of identifying issues. I said, we're in an era where information is disseminated in so many ways: social media, press release, rumor, more. In peer review, well, you can publish almost anything somewhere. So at least on medRxiv, there's a document open to the world to discuss what it means. And I went back to Bobak and others, and I said, respectfully disagree. The intensity of the debate about it is exactly what we're trying to foster in science, that some outlets push beyond the science is a problem with media, not a problem that we're posting with preprints. And Richard Seaver, also co-founder with me, and I should spend more time. I think I neglected to put in a slide of the many people that have contributed to medRxiv. Joe Ross, my colleague, terrific, and couldn't have done it without him. Richard Seaver, John Inglis, Theo Bloom, Claire Rollinson, Sam Hindle, and the whole staff at Cold Spring Harbor make it possible. But anyway, Richard says, channeling HMK a bit, but the argument here is that data are there to be debated and challenged. Since the preprint has appeared, almost every analysis paper I've seen has picked up on its flaws, and one would hope that these end up being put into peer review. Anyway, there's more point here, but my final one is, he's talking about the evolution of scholarly norms. I said this important point. We're in an early phase of clinical preprints. Norms are evolving, but science is being communicated in new ways. We urge the community to comment, engage, inform, debate, educate each other and the public about these contributions. When we looked at journals, we're seeing most journals are accepting preprints now. They're not biasing against them. 86% did. NIH is allowing people to cite them in grant submissions. New England Journal came out at the beginning of the pandemic, and actually Eric Rubin, who's behind this, and what it really is, life sciences guy, comes to New England Journal as editor, and he does something I don't think Jeff Drazen would have done. They come out right away. We encourage authors to submit their work for posting on preprint servers. And Lancet came out, I'll just say this, preprints are here to stay, and Lancet, Elsevier has their own preprint server. Elsevier's for profit, and so they're encouraging everyone to post on it as they submit to Lancet. So, I think I'm just going to end where I started, which is to say, I would hope I've at least convinced you that norms are changing, and that we've got to be responsible in terms of helping to guide the public and understand what preprints are and aren't. But I'm hopeful that a great group like this one will play a role in, as they're submitting their work to the journals, also beginning to be part of this movement to enhance the communication at an earlier phase and support this. So at this point, any questions? I know I've gone a little bit long. I want to thank you all for your attention and for the privilege of being able to present to all of you. And anyone should also feel free, if they'd like, to send me an email or comment or so forth. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Harlan. That was fantastic. Maybe I'll start by asking a question. So if you were to advise a junior faculty now, do you think that they should preprint, then submit the journal? Is that a lot of time added? Is there a lot of financial impediment to preprint? Can you tell maybe a bit more about those?
No, the preprint is, again, I try to promote this idea that the preprint server is of our community. Like it's not mine. I don't, and you know, we try to build it, and I hope I will get a lot of more people, particularly junior people, who contact me and want to be screeners and affiliates and just be part of this community that's contributing as well as using. And there's no cost to posting, and it's outside of a firewall. It's a convenience for our community so that you can send it in, have your stuff posted. There's a comment section. By the way, you can also sign up for alerts within certain areas if you want to know what preprints are posted in your field. And none of this has any, we're getting some support from CZI, and the whole idea was to sort of democratize this whole process, lower the bar. The reason we have 145 countries, a lot of places resource poor, we didn't want it to be any sort of impediment. But I encourage all the junior people, and this is what I do now. We submit to the journals, we post it as a preprint, and we want people to be able to see what we've got. I sometimes am promoting it on Twitter. I'm trying to get people to make comments, and what we've often, as we've gone through the peer review process, are also improving it based on comments we're getting on Twitter or other places, making us think that, in addition to responding to what we're getting from the journals, we also say to the journal, hey, we've also thought we've done X, Y, and Z that will elevate the work. But it also takes the pressure off. Now that can become the publication of record. We can go through peer review, and we're not anxious about like, oh, we've got this paper we want to share, and we've got no means to share it. And so we find that to be a very useful thing. And I do encourage junior people to do it. It feels funny when you do it because we've been so socialized into thinking like this is the journal's. The journal owns it. We sign away the copyright to the journal. We produce the content. People say like, we go in, we make the meal, we serve it, and then the restaurant charges us, to do so, and sets all the rules about how we're able to do it. And this is about like reclaiming it as researchers to say like, I'm trying to share it. I may have overstated. Fine, tell me. If I may have, outrun the data. Fine, tell me. But this is an opportunity for us to try to share, I think, more avidly and earlier in the process. And again, it relaxes me about the work because I don't care if how long it takes for peer review. I've already shared it, and I can cite it. I can use it in any way we want.
Thanks. Maybe I'll just ask Harendra's question. Do you think, like he asked, whether the peer review process would change, like based on preprint? Like, do you think there's going to be a tension? Peer review is going to review faster, and is it a competitive environment or is it collaborative?
Yeah, I'd like to think of them as orthogonal. I mean, I actually want maybe peer review to slow down because I think most of the peer review is not as high quality as it ought to be. And this, and it's like in a busy day, how many requests do you get to review a day? I mean, I get more than one, and on a day, and you start to get a stack of them, and you can't spend 5 hours on a peer review. You just can't. I mean, there's too many requests to do peer review. And so, this sort of allows more people to eyeball it in peer review. But on the peer review side, yeah, take your time and create a good publication of record. I don't care anymore once it's posted. The other thing it's going to make is the peer review community more accountable. Because now that I can see what the original submission looks like, I can ask the question, what value did peer review bring? How much did it change it? Because sometimes my experience is that they've done really good things and they help me improve the manuscript. But a lot of times at the margin, they're having me do a lot of stuff that doesn't fundamentally change the message of the paper. And they're just, but it's like, and if they end up rejecting it, I've got to reformat it. I've got to send it somewhere else. I mean, it's just painful, and it's not really very author centric. And this is, I think, an attempt to say like, yeah, I mean, like get it up. I think the other thing is we've got ways you can post on the preprint server and then just click for submission. So there's some journals like PLOS journals, and I think this will grow, where there's a sort of a synergism going between the preprint server and the journals. And I think that'll be a good thing.
Just wondering, we almost running out of time. Harendra, do you want to say a couple words and now close the meeting?
Well, Well, Harlan, thank you as always, very insightful and disruptive. You're the first of the international speakers that we brought in for Dennis's revamped grand rounds, and I think you set a high bar for what we're going to be looking for in these rounds. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Harlan. It's always it's exciting for me and for others to hear talk. And I think I'm going to tell residents, encourage to push the limit, right? I think that you always teach us we can do better and how to do better. So I really thank you for the expertise and for the mentorship. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Appreciate the venue, and it would be great if you guys had like an internal conference where you talked about what are we in a positive or stance about this, and what do we want to do. And if you need any more information from me, I'm glad to do whatever I can to provide support.
Yeah, for sure.
Advocacy. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Harlan. Thanks everybody for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.